Someone has said that spirituality is what we do with our pain. Now, I'm coming to see that that actually is a good description of spirituality. It seems to me that our pain is certainly an ideal starting point for an authentic spirituality. So the question is, what is our pain? What is it? Well, it seems to me our pain is mainly the powerful negative feelings we experience. These feelings can include things like anxiety, fear, guilt, shame, unworthiness, inadequacy, depression, loneliness, anger, sadness, grief, insecurity. Let's be honest. We all experience many of these feelings. I certainly do, and I have done since childhood. But how do we deal with these powerful negative feelings? Well, usually not by acknowledging them, and certainly not by talking about them. Rather than acknowledging our pain, rather than talking about our pain, we tend to deal with it through addictive behaviours. Addictive behaviours. These addictive behaviours can include things like shopping, busyness, alcohol, too much interest in sport, gambling, overworking, obsessive compulsive disorders, abusive relationships, scrupulosity, withdrawing into isolation, and also, unhealthy religion. Do any of these things seem familiar? If they do, you are starting to be honest with yourself. You are beginning to own your pain. But what causes our pain? What causes it? Where does our pain come from? Our pain comes from our wounds. We are all wounded. We are born into a wounded world. We're born into a wounded family. And we also picked up our own personal wounds, especially in childhood. Now, some of our wounds can be very deep. And deep wounds tend to cause deep emotional pain. To transform our pain, we need to embrace our wounds. We need to embrace our wounds. Now here I'm using the word embrace very deliberately. It is my view, that our wounds are unlikely to be healed fully in this life. They will probably always be there in some form. If we think that getting rid of our wounds is going to be a quick fix, we will be disappointed. Embracing our wounds is to engage in an ongoing process, and this process is like being on a spiral that goes down and down and down. We find ourselves returning to the same wounds, but at a deeper level, for the deeper healing. So what does the process of embracing our wounds involve? What does it involve? Well, it seems to me it involves mainly two things. We need to share our wounds, we need to talk about them, but we also need to surrender them. So it involves those two S's, if you like, sharing and surrendering. So let me say a few things about each of those S's. We need to talk about our wounds and the pain they cause us. Our wounds do not need to be a secret. We shouldn't think that by talking about our wounds, we're going to hurt other people. If we don't talk about our wounds, the only people we're going to hurt is in fact ourselves. You see, when we share our wounds, we are both acknowledging them, but we're also naming them. You know, it is said that if we can name our enemies, we are halfway towards defeating them. Well, that's certainly the case with our wounds. If we are able to name our wounds in the presence of other people, they'll lose some of the power and control they have over us. Of course, we do need to find the right setting to share our wounds, to talk about them. And finding the right setting is the key. Now, the right setting needs to be a safe space, but it also needs to be a confidential space. A loyal and trustworthy friend can offer this space. So can a counsellor or a spiritual director. This kind of space can also be found in a small group setting. But let me be honest here. Whatever the setting, sharing our wounds is not easy. It is not easy because it tends to make us feel exposed, vulnerable, and even naked. But talking about our wounds helps us to accept our truth. And the truth is where freedom is to be found. Remember those words of Jesus, the truth will set you free. The second thing then we need to do to embrace our wounds is to surrender them. We need to surrender our wounds to a higher love, to an unconditional love. This is what those in the AA do. And you may be familiar with the AA program, but the first 3 steps of that program are these. Step 1, I admit I have an addiction. Step 2, I accept that I have no control over my addiction. And step 3, I surrender my addiction to a higher love. Now, there are many names we can give to our higher love. God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, Father, Abba, the Divine Presence. You know, the name we use doesn't really matter. What matters is that we trust the goodness and the power of our higher love. That we know our higher love is on our side and is helping us. As those in the AA will tell you, having someone you can trust to hand your wounds over to is a great source of strength and support. Richard Rohr says that if we can allow our wounds to become sacred wounds, then our story becomes a sacred story. If we can allow our wounds to become sacred wounds, then our story becomes a sacred story. To allow our wounds to become sacred wounds is to accept that we need the help of God to embrace our wounds and the pain they cause us. Now, surrendering our wounds to a higher love also enables us to forgive those who wounded us. Sooner or later, we have to forgive the people who wounded us. If we don't, we are likely to remain stuck. Remember, the people who wounded us were wounded themselves, perhaps wounded deeply. They probably weren't even aware of what they were doing to us at the time. No one is perfect. Everyone is weak. We are all fickle. Failing and falling are part of the human condition. It is said to err is human, to forgive is divine. To err is indeed human. It is indeed human. But in order to forgive others for their human failures, we need the help of our higher love, the divine presence in our lives. Let me finish by saying this. Most people do not embrace their wounds in the first half of life. They are just not ready. They're not ready. They are too caught up in creating an identity for themselves and in establishing themselves in the world. And this is the way it should be. This is what we need to do in the first half of life. But eventually, our wounds will catch up with us. They will look for attention. They will want to be acknowledged and they will want to be embraced. This, in fact, is what happens to us in midlife. It is why we have a midlife crisis. It is why we, in fact, need a midlife crisis. The midlife crisis invites us to embrace our wounds and the pain they cause. If we respond to this invitation and do the work I have described, we will experience a new freedom in our lives. If we don't, we are likely to become stuck on our life's journey. And in my experience, a lot of people remain stuck, trapped in what I would call a midlife limbo, Let's remember that beyond midlife, there is the second half of life. And those who have made it into the second half of life have discovered the power of vulnerability. They know who they are. They are comfortable with who they are. They are compassionate with themselves and others. They are also full of gratitude. Their hearts have become mellow and grateful. Their hearts have become mellow and grateful. And who doesn't want that? Isn't it obvious that there are huge benefits to those who are willing to embrace their wounds?